This is Masters Cast, the first He-Man and She-Ra podcast, episode number 76 for Sunday, December 5th, 2021.
Being a champion is about defending those who can't defend themselves.
Hey everyone, thanks for downloading. I'm John Callis, also known as The Shadow.
I'm Katie Carty-Hiley, also known as Rainbow Bright.
I am Martin Penny, also known as Wacky Martin.
I am Leanne Hanna, also known as Stratosmacker.
And I'm Joshua Lioncourt, also known as Lioncourt.
We just want to warn you off the bat that since our recording here for our review of Masters of the Universe Revelation Part 2 was delayed due to the holidays, we're going to assume that everyone has already digested and watched the show like we have. So this is going to be an entire spoiler-filled review. So if you haven't watched Part 2, go ahead and watch that first before getting spoiled by us.
We'll still be here.
Yeah, we'll still be here on all of your favorite podcasting platforms. We recommend subscribing, and then you'll get our random dropping of episodes without missing any of them.
76 of them over the last 16 years now.
Yes, and we still have fun with them. Isn't that awesome?
Yes.
And we're going to have some fun today, aren't we? Before we start, I would just like to say that whether you liked Masters of the Universe Revelation Part 2 or you didn't like it, you're allowed to have your own opinion. So if you loved it, that's awesome, right? I'm happy for you. If you didn't like it, I understand why you might be disappointed. But that's okay too. Like, it's not the end of the world. But at the end of the day, we all like many different aspects of Masters of the Universe. And I'm sure we will like and dislike many things going forward.
That's a very well put.
I just want to say that.
Have you considered a career as a diplomat?
I just want to say that because I don't want, because I have a feeling I know how our review is going to go, and I don't want to be lumped in with a certain kind of group of people that would have been kind of like the Part 1 review backlash. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. I'm like, ours is still coming from a place of love. And we are obviously absolutely huge fans of He-Man and She-Ra. So, just take it with what you will. And that way, and with saying that, and I'm losing my voice, I would like to pass it on to someone else so I can get my voice back, and so that I'm not the primary target of review.
Should we begin with general thoughts on Part 2 overall, please. And then we can get into the nitty-gritty?
Yeah, give it like overall. You don't have to name any specifics. We'll kind of go through the storyline, I guess, after we give our first thoughts.
Who wants to go first?
I think you should this time, Josh, since you're the odd one out.
Thanks. Okay. That was a spoiler for the podcast, not even for the show.
Oh, no.
We're talking about. So, Part 2, I think, suffers from some problems. I think they had a decent story to tell and not enough time to tell it in. And were too enthusiastic to include things that were superfluous, sort of like empty calories, right? We're putting these in for this fan group, or we're putting this in for that fan group, that sliver of the fan base, this sliver of the fan base, and ended up with too much crammed into too little time. That said, I think the story is fine, but was rushed and needed more time to breathe. But it wasn't, I wouldn't say it was terrible. I just think the execution could have and should have been better.
Katie?
That was actually, I agreed with that more than I thought I would. Yeah, because, okay, obviously this group of how many of 5, we started talking the day that the show came out. Some of us were, they started first thing in the morning, like stayed up or got up really early to start binging the show. Some of us, it was later in the day, etc. But as we started watching it, we started talking, and we were throwing ideas and opinions back and forth throughout. But now we've had some more time to sit with it. And earlier on, Josh was much more excited, I would say. And now I'm not saying he's not excited at all about the show, but I think with time, he's tempered that a little bit. And gosh, what do I want to say apart from what Josh did? There were some cringeworthy things to me. I will say that. I don't think the entire part 2 was cringy. I don't think. I'm a little conflicted because, like John said, we are all massive HeMan and She-Ra fans. We went into this wanting to love it, obviously. We found a lot of good things about part 1 to enjoy, so we expected that we were going to find as many things to love about part 2. And I think I can safely say for the rest of us, we didn't, unfortunately. So I don't hate it, but I definitely don't love it. And I have watched it 2.5 times now. I watched it once by myself. Then I started rewatching it. I got through, I think, episode 3. And then my husband was like, wait, I haven't even seen it yet. And I'm like, oh, right. Okay, let's start over again. So I watched all 5 with him. So I've given it a fair shake, and I'm still not loving it. But I'll let somebody else speak. I don't know what else to say right now until we get into the spoilers.
All right, Martin.
During my first watch through of this, I can accurately sum up my very harsh critique of the show by going instant trash. And on my second watch through, I was much more forgiving of it. And I found moments of brilliance amongst what I thought was an absolute mess of a season. Coming as somebody who really enjoyed the first part, thought it was very well structured, thought it gave us like interesting things we hadn't had before. I felt this was just a cacophony of stuff happening all the time that wasn't very well explained or developed or foreshadowed, perhaps, although things were foreshadowed, but there was no satisfying payoff. And I think that probably sums it up best for me. Everything that was set up nicely in part 1 failed to pay off in part 2 for the most part for me, and I was quite let down by it. But there was still good stuff in there, here and there.
Yes.
The animation is beautiful. I'll end on that positive note, and the music is amazing.
Yes.
Leanne?
Yes, so I was going to say, I mean, I agree with everybody. I thought, I think having watched part 2, it made me like part 1 more, because I felt like structurally the story made more sense in part 1, whereas in part 2, I felt like it was just all over the place. It was trying to be too many things at once, I think. But I will say that the animation was gorgeous. I really liked some of the designs that we got, like Teela Sorceress and Hevelin. So there were, I mean, there were good there were good things design wise and things like that. Powerhouse Animation did a fantastic job. The music was good. Story wise, not so much. And also, some random chick with a pitchfork got more lines than Stratos did. And basically, if you saw the trailer, you saw the entirety of Stratos in the series, which I don't know, maybe it's a good thing in the end. I don't know.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
He's still alive anyway.
That's true. That's very true.
Watch out for season 2, though, Leanne. You might have a burial. That means I go last. That's still a target. I should have put myself in the middle. I have to be blunt with this just because I am such a fan. This was terribly difficult for me to sit through. I was actually, I think all of you have a more favorable opinion of part 2 than I do. I can't remember a time when I've had difficulty getting through any type of piece of He-Man or She-Ra media. We don't get a lot of it, right? And so it was one of the weirdest feelings because I just was like, this is wrong. And I don't mean that to sound mean. I had, what I feel, I guess, are solid reasons. And one of the big things is characterization for me. And I thought not only the characterization of Adam and He-Man was completely incorrect in part 2 compared to part 1, right? I think there was a clear difference in how they handled things in part 1 versus part 2. And also the characterization of the power of Grayskull, I thought was completely off. And I will explain that deeper in the show. But I was actively sitting on my couch, and I got up early, as Katie knows, to watch it, and we were all texting back and forth in our group chat, and it's even hard for me to re-describe that the feeling. My only positives I can say is that the music is good and the animation is at to this point the most lush and beautiful media display of Masters of the Universe characters that I've ever seen. So kudos to Powerhouse Animation.
Can I want to explore something you said for a second from 2 angles. So let me ask from both angles, and then you can answer however you want. So I'm wondering, as you're talking, 2 things. One, do you think if this hadn't had the CGI show sandwiched in between that you liked a lot, do you think this might have landed a little bit differently for you? Not a lot differently, but like a little bit differently. You might have been a little bit more forgiving because you didn't have this other show that you really enjoyed stuck in the middle. And secondly, I can definitely empathize to some degree about the characterization part of it, because that is sort of how I felt about certain characters in the CGI show, particularly Duncan, and the fact that they're all much, much younger than we've ever seen them portrayed and stuff. So that didn't appeal to me watching the CGI show. So that part of it, I can empathize with you on to some degree. And I'm wondering if this not being or if this hadn't been billed as a successor to Filmation or whatever, if you might have been more forgiving of some of those characterizations that did not set well with you.
No, I hadn't thought of that, and I do see your point, because part 1 of Revelation, I wasn't like super ecstatic about it, but it certainly was better than, part 2. But like, I did watch it several times and I didn't necessarily hate it. Then the CGI show came out, and that was like a huge like dopamine rush, right? I was like, this is amazing. And I looked at that show as its own entity, right? It's not a sequel to anything. It's not a reboot in the sense of Mike Young's show rebooting kind of the classic story that we know. Whereas, and I, people can yell at me and say that they never said this was specifically a direct sequel to Filmation, but I mean, check it at the door. You can call it a spiritual sequel or whatever Kevin Smith's more recent retroactive tweet was about it. But I don't care. It was billed that way. They certainly inserted enough oddly placed Filmation type lines in part 2 as well, I thought, that were completely out of place. So Josh, I don't know. I could go 50-50 on it. I don't think that I still think I would have greatly despised part 2 even without the CGI show. Would I have disliked it as much? My gut says yes, but I mean, it's hard for me to remove it's hard for me to remove the excitement of the CGI show. And I mean, like, because if you would say to me, what do you want, more Revelation or more CGI show? I'm going to say I want season 2 of the CGI show.
Which I'm dreading.
Which you're dreading. And that's what I was trying to say, like in my little summary. I was sitting on the couch watching part 2 and I'm like, oh, this must have been how Josh felt during the CGI show, because I've never, even though, I've had my gripes with things like, King Grayskull in Mike Young Productions and stuff. I just had that. This is going to sound so dramatic that I should be made fun of. I just felt like my soul left my body while I was watching the show. It was like I felt empty, and it just kept doing things that I was just like, oh no, why? Oh, they're gonna do that now. Yeah, and then I was like, you must keep watching, it will get better. And I don't say this to be mean. This was my genuine reaction as a fan since birth. I can't help it.
I can't help but feel like part 1 and part 2 of Revelation were done almost completely independent of each other, because they don't even feel like part of the same show.
Mm-hmm. Well, structurally, especially, right?
Yeah, I mean, I said something very similar, which was that it felt to me a bit like what happened with The Rise of Skywalker in response to The Last Jedi. Almost like someone had seen the first part and gone, oh, the fans don't like Taylor. We gotta get Taylor out of there. You gotta put more characters in. Make more about Skeletor. Turn him into the Hulk. That's what they want. They don't want the Taylor stuff. And like someone just came in and just completely, like, whatever they had planned for part 2, wrote that out. Like, people want more of the Game of Thrones woman. Put her in it more. And they just like completely changed what they actually had planned.
Well,
tried desperately to fix it.
We know, right, that it was all already written, right, before that backlash came out. Yes. And half of it was, more than half of it was already animated.
But it feels like a total different group of people working on part 2, because part 1 is much more coherent, much more satisfying, much more true to the characters, even though there were things you could quibble with, right? Like, but it was a much more solid piece of storytelling. And if this had been I mentioned this in our chat and I'm going to mention it here. I think if this had been like a 13, 15 episode long season instead of 10, and we still had the same first 5, and then the last 5 were spread out over 10 episodes, I think you could have actually gotten a really decent story out of this and dealt with a lot of the problems, because I think a lot of the characterization problems that you see in part 2, that you specifically, John, see in part 2, I think a lot of those are a direct result of they didn't have time to do it the way they should have. They were cramming so much in here. It was just like, well, we don't really have time to deal with this the way that it ought to be dealt with from a storytelling perspective and a characterization perspective. We got to get on to the next thing because we've only got 20 minutes an episode to finish this up. And that to me, that was one of that was part two's biggest failing. And I like it overall. I like it a lot more than anybody else here, I think. But its biggest failing was trying to cram so much into so little time.
Well, let me piggyback off that and use an example to agree with you. So I was so excited, and this was in the first episode of part two, so I that's a good place to start. When Prince Adam says that he has the spark, right? So he can actually harness the power of Grayskull without the use of the Sword of Power. Okay. So I was all on board for that. I thought this was amazing. And I thought, now I'm going to get that explanation, right, of why Adam decided to be Adam in Preternia, right, instead of being his powered up form like all the other people. And then B, I would actually get that explanation as to why there is something special, in the destiny, the DNA, the whatever, the metachlorian counts.
Oh God, don't go there.
In Prince Adam, right? Because the opening title sequence even pumps up Prince Adam, and whatever. Teela was the main character of part one. It wasn't Prince Adam. You know what I mean? And people can tell me till they're red in the face that Masters of the Universe is, a multi-character property. I don't disagree with you. And I do want to see Teela become the sorceress. I want to see these things, but they are not the primary characters of Masters of the Universe, which are HeMan and Skeletor. Can't change my mind on that. So the fact that they're sidelined for the secondary stories, I think was the big problem, because you have Prince Adam, who is the main character, or one of the two main characters, if you will, of Masters of the Universe side of things, right? And you don't even explain to me why he is the spark. And I do not agree with answers like, that's why you're going to want a season 2. No, because none of this in part 2 made sense to me when he becomes, Savage He-Man and starts killing people, which is absolutely out of character for He-Man, not out of character probably for someone like the Hulk, this was just another problem of all these direct ripoffs. Hulk, Lord of the Rings, like how many different Marvel or fantasy properties can I throw into a bucket and disperse to Masters of the Universe characters? We'll get into that later when we talked about Orko, but so back to Josh's point. If they would have taken the time to explain why Prince Adam is the spark, I would have been loving that. Even if I didn't necessarily agree with why he was the spark, if that makes sense, at least I would have gotten that explanation as why. Why is he the spark? Why? I've been given no information to this, and
Skeletor never figures it out. He goes looking, and he never discovers why he can do that.
Yeah, and it's just like that, and take over.
There's a conflict here, I think, too, that goes back to where we started. We're going full circle, and we've only been going for 10 minutes. But I'm going to bring this back around.
Bring it back, also, Josh.
Yeah, I'm going to bring this back around to the problem with this being billed as a spiritual sequel or whatever to the '80s cartoon, because one way or the other, right? Like they're trying to have it both ways. Like, this feels like this should have worked better as as its own entity, and yet I think their argument, I'm not speaking for them, but I think what they would tell you to this kind of, I'm playing devil's advocate here a little bit, is what I think they would say is, well, you already know all that because you know the '80s show, but this show departs in a lot of ways from the '80s show. It isn't really a sequel, so it's like, they couldn't decide what they wanted this show to be, and so certain aspects, like what you're talking about, come into conflict.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll actually really quick. My friend who was watching it, he said, I don't know who this show was for. It wasn't for us old school fans, and it wasn't for a new audience either.
I was just thinking that, Leanne.
It's like they didn't know what they wanted to do with it in the end. I felt like, and again, this comes back to the first part being more structured, whereas this was just kind of all over the place. Yeah, I don't know. It was I just thought it was a mess overall.
And I wonder.
Oh, sorry.
Real quick, I was just curious because we know that a hardcore fan is one of the producers on this show. So, and I'm talking about Ted. We love you, Ted. This is nothing against you, my baby. I love you so much. I don't know why I just called you a baby. Whatever. Baby honey child.
Term of endearment.
It is. It's
just to show that we're not hating on Ted or even, Kevin Smith. I mean,
yeah.
It's just we don't necessarily always agree with the creative ideas. Just like, look, Josh doesn't like the CGI show, but I like that characterization, right? We're both obviously fans. It's a valid opinion.
And we all hate the Star Wars prequels, right? So it's like there's always something in every property.
Well, I kind of liked Attack of the Clones, though. Wasn't that a prequel?
Yes.
I like prequels.
Oh, you're a millennial. You're excused.
I was of age at the time.
Yes. But what I was going to say, wait, real quick. What I was going to say about that and the people we know that worked on it, or the person that we know that worked on it, is a very hardcore fan, a huge collector, has been in the fandom since childhood, knows all the different canons. I feel like this was they tried to make it for that type of hardcore fan. And even us who have been podcasting about it for over 15 years, and I'm not a collector anymore. I ran out of room. I collected a bunch of the classics figures, and I still collect like the Dark Horse books and a few things that come out here and there. But I had to choose between Rainbow Bright and He-Man, and I couldn't have them both. So I had to just stop with He-Man, unfortunately. But I feel like this is more for the super hardcore, will spend all their money on all the toys and read all the comics and know all of the original canon, excuse me, all the extra canonical canon, like all of the comics that have ever been released. There was so much in here that I just didn't get. And then y'all are telling me, oh yeah, it's explained in the comic. And I'm like, wait, I shouldn't have to read a comic to understand a TV show. I've never seen a show or a movie where I came away thinking, or I came away just totally confused, and somebody was like, oh, if you just read the comic, you would get it. And I'm like, wait, what? Like, that should never be a prerequisite for enjoying a piece of visual media, in my opinion. Like a book series, that's one thing. Like, you can't say, oh, just watch the Harry Potter movies, they're the same as reading the books. No, they're not. But that is a completely different thing. That is I can't think of the word all of a sudden.
Well, but the Harry Potter movies, like, as you know, I've only read half of the books, right?
Yeah.
So, but I understand everything for the most part, going on in the movies.
Yeah.
Whereas you're you're saying you had questions about, say, Evil Lynn. You would have learned that in the prequel comic, but you shouldn't have had to. Like, again, it goes to Josh saying about the not enough episodes to develop this, because having two sentences about how Evil Lynn's parents wanted to eat her when she was a child, I mean, just goes over what now? What, they wanted to eat her?
I was so confused. I was literally texting y'all like, seriously? Her
and then we're like,
turned into cannibals, and that's her backstory.
Also, that was so bad, because I loved what they did with her origin in the Mike Young show. Yes. And so to turn it into her parents wanted to eat her, so she ran away and met up with Skeletor and somehow had magic and stuff. It just made no sense. And I have not read the comic, so I don't know how it expands on that. But
Well, the comic even ruins the surprise of the Horde, because Hordak and Horde members, and Skeletor with the Horde belt on, that's all in the prequel comic, which came out the bulk of it came out before Part 2. So it even kind of destroyed any type of little when in the episode Skeletor walks through that portal, and he has the Horde symbol on his belt. I knew that was going to happen because I read the comic.
And I saw it and was just like, what the heck? Like, are they going to explain this? And then they didn't.
Yeah.
I will say, though, I did like his design, though.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
That was cool.
Yep.
I was with Skeletor like 100% throughout the entirety of this series. I was like, I think he's getting, a pretty bad rap here, because there's a bit where like Evelyn is like, I've always hated Skeletor and I've wanted to kill him for 20 years. And I was like, but why? Because he's not really done anything that bad. And there's a bit in the show where even Skeletor himself is like, this is unbelievable. And I was like, I'm with you. I think this is like very unfair on Skeletor.
Well, jumping around, then this is fine, I think. I love that example. I'm the same way. I think we mentioned this in our pre-chat before the thing. Why isn't Skeletor redeemed at the end of Part 2? Why is Evelyn redeemed? Can someone explain to me why the lady that grabs all the power, kills off everybody in heaven, is about to destroy the entire world, okay? Or not the world, the entire universe, just because she's sad. She's sad. Woo-hoo. She's going to destroy everything. And she gets redeemed at the end. She had done no redeeming qualities except she decides to pull Orko back from being sucked back into the vortex.
Yeah.
And how?
And it's like, that doesn't make sense. But also, I can't remember who mentioned it in the chat, but if she had switched places with Orko and sacrificed herself, that would have been fine.
Yes.
Right.
But instead, she just holds onto his hand, and somehow that keeps him from drifting back, to Subternia or whatever.
And she was totally not on Subternia, so we know that wasn't like the switcheroo.
Yeah.
So can I throw a different interpretation out?
No.
And then I'm going to throw a different interpretation out, and then I just want to also mention that I need to go back. I want to circle back to Savage HeMan before.
Oh yes, please, because I got more on that too.
I do too. So, but I will say this as far as answering this question. I think the situation with Evelyn, I believe that in asking that question, we're either, and again, I think this is a problem with the too rushed storytelling, but I think that her redemption is not in her saving Orko or whatever. I think what we're supposed to take away, and which is not delivered well to us, not executed well, is her redemption is that final scene where she gives up her magic, presumably on Tralla, which apparently is not visually obvious that she is on Tralla, but that is indeed where she's supposed to be, according to the audio description and several things I've read online now. So I think maybe her redemption is supposed to come in the scene that she is giving up her power, realizing I did not use this the way I was supposed to. I'm going to start over. Not in the she's redeemed before that.
I agree.
Or whatever, but it's all because it's all so rushed, and they're cramming so much into especially those last like 5 or 10 minutes of the final episode. Like there's so much that happens in there that I think it loses its
my problem though with that is if I had a gun and I murdered a whole bunch of people, and then I turn to the cops and I put my gun down and I say, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. I've learned the error of my ways. Please send me to a trial in paradise. Like, you know what I mean? No, I'm going to go to trial for murder, and then I'm going to probably get either like the death penalty or I'm going to be in prison forever.
Right.
I would have rather let Skeletor go have a beach vacation on Tralla. I mean, he killed the sorceress. She's old already. And then all he wanted to do was get the kill He-Man. And even
they killed his
Evil Lyn-
cat.
Yeah, and Evil Lyn.
Okay, so here's a question though.
Oh, that was the worst.
So maybe I'm not remembering or missed something, but I don't believe did the Internian law enforcement, so to speak? I mean, no one was like, "Hey, Evelyn, we forgive you. You're off scot-free." Like, she just takes off, doesn't she?
Well, then I fault the characterization of Tila, because she was the one trying to rope Evil Lyn in during that whole scene. And given another complaint of mine in part 2 is that Tila gets everything she wants. She just whines about it and she gets it, including changing the entire rules of how one becomes the sorceress of Grayskull just to fit her will. Don't even get me started on the last scene of the thing when she's talking about Prince Adam, because I'm just gonna have to leave.
Okay, so
we're jumping around so much, I know, but you need to keep Josh, take back over, because I'm almost gonna get mad. And
I will say this, and I'd actually like to hear everyone's take on that point though with Tila throughout this part, because I hear what you're saying about her.
Well, doesn't it call back to you saying about there's no development on this? Like,
right,
she doesn't.
right.
How she just starts using her magic. Like, I think Martin, didn't you say something about Star Wars? It's kind of like how Rey
it's exactly
in Star Wars, right? It's
yes.
just like, I'm a super Jedi in the first movie.
Yes, exactly.
I don't believe I did say that, but I agree with it.
I love the new. I actually really like the new trilogy of Star Wars and Rey in particular. But my friend Eric was talking to me about this show. He actually really liked part 2. He's like, I don't know what your guys' problem is. You're overthinking everything, and he also thought we watched it too fast. He's like, he spread it out over a week and a half, watching like an episode every day or two, and ended up really liking it. He's like, maybe if you'd spread it out or something. I was like, I don't think that would have changed
Nobody
much.
does that these days.
Yeah, well, it's the thing. But anyway, it's a common thread in storytelling now, where it's just like, here's our main character. We need to keep the story moving, so we don't have time to let them struggle over gaining their power and so on and so forth, which I don't agree with, because I think that's actually the most interesting part of these kinds of stories, and would have liked to have seen Tila struggle with that. But that is the direction that a lot of fantasy storytelling has gone, particularly on film, like for TV movies, I think, in the last decade-ish. So I'm not sure we can really fault the show for following the trend of modern fantasy per se. But it also comes down to the same thing that's going to be my theme and my mantra through this entire podcast, I think, is there just wasn't time to do it the way they should have, like with what they crammed in there. So I want to connect this to the Savage He-Man thing, but before I do that, I want to hear everybody else's take on the Tila thing, because I actually really liked the fact that it fits with her character, that she is bucking the system. She is going against what she's supposed to be doing to become the sorceress, and going her own way, and having that strong will and hot-headed, I'm doing this my way. Like, that's what Tila's always been. So that part of it, I think, actually does fit with her character. It's just not fleshed out the way it should have been.
Just real quick, I 100% agree with that. It's in character for her, but it's not fleshed out. That's what annoyed me with it, because it was just like, I'm not going to get stuck in this castle for the rest of my life. Wah. I'm just going to tell the powers of the elders that, I'm not doing that, but you're still going to make me the most apparently powerful being in the universe now. And I can leave the castle. Oh, it's the greatest life for me.
Yeah. It was the whole part 1 to me was building up to Tila becoming the sorceress. And part 2 had maybe 2 scenes of Tila, like
10 minutes max,
accepting that she was going to be the sorceress, one of which was when she walked into a pool, and the other one was when she healed Adam randomly. She knew she had some sort of magical power, so I can kind of accept that she was just like, well, I'll give it a go. But the next time that we even discussed Tila, like becoming a magical user was when she walked into that pool and she just became the sorceress. And I was like, oh, we're done with that then. We've all just accepted this. Oh, and she knew that the sorceress was her mother all along. That's fine. Okay, well, we've spared ourselves a revelation scene there, haven't we? Where is the revelation? It is nowhere.
I guess we were all spared her like freaking out all over again over everything.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
I didn't want another
true.
dramatic scene of everyone bursting into tears and
Yeah.
King Randor ordering
I hate
people's
you all.
executions.
Yes,
Right?
yes. I mean, I could buy her at the end, being able to leave the castle, because I just feel like that's her testing the boundaries, and that does fit in with her character. But it's like what you guys said, it's just not fleshed out enough. But one thing I will say I did like in this was that they made Man-at-Arms her actual father.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, I was really glad they did that, because that's something I always wanted in the Mike Young show. And, it was always hinted that Fisto was her father, and I didn't like that.
You didn't like did you not enjoy Fisto's role in this series?
Oh, where he wanted to fist Skeletor? Yeah, that was great.
Was this explained in the prequel comics? Do the prequel comics feature Fisto fisting people?
Yeah, maybe that was more fleshed out in the comics, and
Well, speaking
okay, about some of the dialogue, right?
yes.
Like that, or some of it, obviously they were trying to do more of the jokey, filmation type stuff, but it's kind of like you guys said, they were trying to have it both ways, because it's like you're trying to fit that stuff in. Meanwhile, Savage He-Man has just like ripped apart these creatures, and there's blood dripping from his hands. And then you've got Evelyn like straddling Skeletor and like making out with his teeth to try and get him to, get it on with her so he'll power down and she can like manipulate him. And it's just like, I mean, that scene, I never ever needed to see something like that.
Yeah.
Like never. So I don't know. It was just a mishmash.
All right. So that is a perfect segue to what I want to say about Savage He-Man. And I know John's got stuff to say about Savage He-Man as well.
I'll try to contain the volume of my voice this time, though. I think I got a little overexcited in the previous conversation.
Okay. So I keep talking about this, that they crammed too much into too few episodes. Yada, yada, yada. Okay. One of the things that made that a problem is the Savage He-Man subplot, because it is pointless. I understand the references that they're trying to do, the kind of the biblical thing. Don't get too much power and blah blah blah. Infinite power corrupts infinitely, or whatever. Like, I get what they were going for, but A, we didn't have enough time for the story already that they were trying to tell, and B, it does not advance the story in literally just about any way.
Yeah.
The only purpose it served, and it did not need to be the thing that served this purpose, was the revelation to Randor that Adam is still alive. Okay, great. We could have done that like 50 other ways. It didn't need to be Savage He-Man. And Savage He-Man basically takes up the entirety of episode 2 of part 2. That is that entire episode, basically, with a couple of other scenes thrown in, and it doesn't advance the story of what's going on with Skeletor now that he's got the power. It doesn't advance the story of Evelyn, making her way toward deciding to betray Skeletor. It doesn't advance anything. And it's basically never referenced again after episode 2, except for Adam saying, yeah, I'm not going to do that again. Like, that's it. It didn't need to be there. It serves no story purpose whatsoever. It was literally just here as fan service to a tiny sliver of the fans that like the Savage He-Man, Barbarian He-Man concept, which is by no means a majority of fans at all.
And that's just from the mini comics, right?
right?
Basically, yes.
Yeah,
And
that's exactly what I was thinking. It was just this tiny portion of the fandom who's even going to get that reference and understand it. And even then, like, I got the reference, but I still was just like, and why are we spending this much time on it?
Yeah,
but
it's
continue.
just completely meaningless, and compounded by what John was talking about earlier with the fact that, oh, Adam has the spark. Of course, we're never going to mention that again either. And it's like, sure, we can sit here and rationalize it away to some degree. It's like, I was saying, I think the idea here is supposed to be, you know, Castle Grayskull from at least the earliest days was supposed to be all the power in the universe if you have control over Grayskull and the power hidden therein, blah, blah, blah. Okay, great. And anyone can control that power. Otherwise, there's no point for Skeletor trying to obtain it, or Hordak trying to obtain it, and all these other people, you know, villains that have tried to obtain it over the years. So you kind of have to make it so anybody can control it. The spark thing, you could kind of rationalize away and say, okay, well, you know, it's Adam's and Adora's destiny to control the power because they are the best caretakers and defenders of that power, but they're not the only ones who can. Like, so you can like sit there and rationalize till you're blue in the face, basically, but they didn't even touch on it again. It was like, oh, I have the spark. I can turn into this thing. Oh, man, that was a mistake. Never doing that again. Okay, we just wasted 25 minutes of a very limited time span, and we've got tons more story that we're going to now try to cram into the next 3 episodes before the season's over. Like, this didn't need to be there. And I think everything else that we're going to quibble about and argue about and criticize that happens in particularly episodes 8, 9, and 10 would all have been better if it had been expanded on, fleshed out better, and just get rid of the Savage He-Man story, because it does not need to be there. Also, in conjunction with that, the weird zombie ram-headed thing that Skeletor does in episode 1 of part 2, it's never really dealt with again. It's never mentioned. It's like, why is this here? This is just a superfluous storyline that is not getting anywhere and only makes any modicum of sense whatsoever if you have read the prequel comics, again, like we were talking about with the Evil Id thing, because this is part of the story that Skeletor makes up in those. And it's like, I don't understand why this is even being in here, and we only get Clam Champ on screen for 5 seconds before he's dead. And it's like, he's a character we've never seen animated that I really like. Clam Champ, I like the idea of his character, and we're finally going to get him on screen for the first time ever in 40 years of the franchise, and it's 2 seconds for a storyline that doesn't matter. It's very, very frustrating. So episodes 1 and 2, I feel like you could almost take almost everything that happened in those, scrap it, and expand the rest of the story, and you've got a much better part 2. So anyway, I'm gonna step off my soapbox and let somebody else talk now.
Yeah, let me just so with the Clamp Champ thing, because I want to make sure I mention this. This all Savage He-Man and the Clamp Champ / Fisto death scene. All of this, to me, plays into my 2 major problems with part 2, which I mentioned earlier, which are the characterization of Prince Adam and the characterization of the power of Grayskull. So Savage He-Man completely contradicts the idea of the He-Man that I grew up with, right? And as far as I know, this was an adult show aimed at me. And He-Man doesn't kill, okay? So I don't care if he's Savage He-Man. I never needed to see He-Man with blood, I think Leanne mentioned, dripping off of his hands. Yeah. I agree with you, Josh. It was a complete fan service for no other point than to, A, we can sell a Savage He-Man toy, and B, there is a small sect in the fandom that loves those first few mini comics where He-Man is a bit more Conan the Barbarian than the He-Man that the media really knows. And it was just completely out of character. And then they didn't even do it uniquely. All they did was use a, Bruce Banner Hulk situation and then replace King Randor with Black Widow from the Avengers movies, talking him back down into Adam. I just thought that was completely pointless. Again, if it was explained, the spark part, maybe I could handle the Savage He-Man portion of it, but no. Back to the characterization of Adam when Fisto and Clampchamp start to become the zombies. And again, is this happening because The Walking Dead is really popular? I don't know. But Adam takes absolutely no time to really assess the situation and quickly states that, well, their souls are already gone, so you just kill them. Like this is something Prince Adam would never do, right? Prince Adam would just never do this. He would try everything he could. How could we save Fisto and Clampchamp? And it's really, really lazy writing to me, that you think to have a cartoon, like an animated piece, appeal to adults is that you have to insert sex and murder violence. I just think this is the cheap way out.
Well, they were also they were shortcuts, right? Because shortcuts, they didn't have time to do what they should have done.
But you know what? If you don't have the time to do it, then you need to restructure
exactly
part 2, right? I mean, I agree with you with the time, and and they could say that back to us, right? Well, yeah, we would have loved to have done a 20 episode arc, but even things like Netflix She-Ra handled the same thing. Adora can't transform into She-Ra, right? Her sword was broken. Okay, so instead of just not having the sword anymore, the sword was broken. When Adora found the power within and she transformed into a better version of She-Ra, right? She didn't turn into like She-Hulk. Who's, no offense to She-Hulk fans, I don't know what her characterization is in the comics, but if it's anything like Hulk smash, she didn't turn into that. She turned into an even better version of She-Ra, which I think, Leanne, back on those reviews, you pointed out that I had missed how even different aspects of She-Ra's costume now harkened back to her friends Glimmer, Bow, and Catra. So all of that was integrated. It was like the power of love, like the song. So that to me makes sense. That is in character for Adora, and that's also in character for the power of Grayskull. And that's why my second point is Savage He-Man also destroys the characterization to me of the power of Grayskull. And I always go back to this Kid Stuff book that I loved when I was a child. And again, I'm only using this as rationalization because this was not a reboot or a revamp. This was billed as a spiritual continuation of the classic stuff. So whether that's Filmation, mini comics, Kid Stuff, audiobooks count. And in the Castle Grayskull one, where they explain Castle Grayskull, and it does the whole thing, Hall of Wisdom, Castle Grayskull, all of that. They talk about how the Hall of Wisdom was the storehouse of all the knowledge in the universe. And then the elders compress themselves, all their strength, and knowledge into that orb. Okay. And that was one thing I always thought was interesting, was, to me, the power was always knowledge. And maybe that's the growing up on PBS educational television that they don't really have anymore is for me, but like knowledge is power. So the fact that when he gets the raw knowledge, and I did kind of like how they did touch upon that. Like, remember when Skelligod was kind of entranced in like all of that information he was receiving? Like, that was good to me. Like, that was on point. But the fact that Savage He-Man occurs, to me, given that the power of Grayskull is truly all of, say, the strength and knowledge of the elders, I just don't feel that the power of Grayskull equals rage. So, and I stole that from a friend who said that to me. Like, the power of Castle Grayskull is not rage, and I loved that sentence. And I was like, that is exactly how I feel about this Savage He-Man thing. I agree that people can obtain the power and misuse it, but I just don't think that would happen with Prince Adam. It should have happened how it happened to Adora in Netflix She-Ra. And that's my long sentence. Someone else can go now.
Yeah, I just want to say, I totally agree with all of that. This was just, if they wanted to shoehorn Savage He-Man into this story, this was pretty much the only way they could have done that and have it be Savage He-Man. This is, and so they did, but that's exactly what it is shoehorning something in that didn't belong in this story, that doesn't really make sense with what has come before, and is purely there for servicing a portion of the fan base. And it really detracts. I think it's one of the biggest detractors from part 2. I think if it wasn't there, it would be a much better story.
Yeah, I don't know about you, John, but when he killed the Manticore and then had blood dripping from his hands, and there's like the river running with blood, and I think Andrew even says like he basically turned the Manticore inside out. I was just like, oh my God, you just like stabbed a knife into my childhood heart right now. Because He-Man would never do that no matter what. It's just off the table in my mind for that character. So yeah, that part was very hard to watch, and I hate it. I still hate it. I just no. Just no.
The phrase you use, that type of thing, is off the table. That's what I agree with. He-Man is unique in the fact that he's kind of pure of heart. Whether that's hokey or not, I don't care, because that is what we grew up with, and that is and I'm not. You can be a fan of the first couple mini comics. Go to that and reread them, weekly if you wish. I don't care. That's awesome. But the bulk of Masters of the Universe and Princess of Power was crafted in the minds of children, not from the mini comics, but from the Filmation television series, because that was the biggest media explosion for He-Man and She-Ra that probably there will ever be. And that's why, if you're going to bill it as something that's coming as a sequel to the 80s and not just like a standalone, like this might have worked if it was just billed as like, how like DC Animation does a lot of, standalone Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern animated movies. Mm-hmm. Like if this was just billed as maybe like a new He-Man animated movie, Revelation, my perspective, like a mini series or something, I might have gone in it with a different look. I probably wouldn't have hated this Savage He-Man thing as much as I did, because to me, it's like you're taking what I know of He-Man and completely changing him. And I don't like that. Even in the New Adventures and the CGI show, and really kind of even the live action movie, He-Man still stays in that kind of characterization bubble that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I don't think in any way that is a hokey thing. And I want to give a just very quick, concrete example, because I think this can still be done and is still done in modern storytelling, where you've got the hero who is the hero because they are that pure of heart type of thing. So spoiler alert for another property. If you don't want to hear it, skip ahead 2 minutes or whatever, but you probably, everyone knows this by now. So in the Harry Potter story, Harry, at the very end, he faces off against Voldemort, the most evil wizard that has ever existed, and who has killed countless people and done unspeakable evil things. And Harry ends up defeating him by choosing in that final duel to use the defensive spell to disarm Voldemort, rather than the killing curse that he could have used to end Voldemort for good. And that ends up being what finishes Voldemort off, is his decision to do the right thing, not the easy thing, right? To quote another Harry Potter character. So this can be done, is frequently done, and could have just as easily been done here. And so I agree with you that this is not the way they should have gone.
Well, let me take it back to Tila real quick, because I don't think I got to weigh in on her turning into the sorceress. I was at least happy that we finally got a show where she turns into the sorceress. Although, wait, did she do that in the CGI show too?
She does, but I mean, it was
It's
quicker.
different because she like transforms into the sorceress when she needs to use her power or whatever. So.
But
Okay.
Katie, just I want to clarify. I with the Tila thing, because it's well known, right? I don't like Tila, but I am totally on board for seeing Tila become the sorceress. I just don't like the overall execution in this particular.
Oh no, I agree with you as far as execution goes. I was interviewed on another podcast not that long ago before Revelation 2 Part 2 came out about Rainbow Bright, but it was someone who was also a HeMan fan. So we talked about HeMan, we talked about Harry Potter, etc. And one of the things I said in looking forward to Part 2 is we have to see Tila turn into the sorceress. Like, I've been waiting since I was a child for that to happen. I need to see it. So I was at least happy that we got that finally, even if it wasn't done exactly the way we would have done it ourselves if we had been the ones imagining this. But I also think, like y'all were saying, that it fits her characterization to buck the system a bit, as far as when she turns into the sorceress, being like, okay, just because all of y'all decided, read in some book or it was passed down verbally, I don't know why y'all think you have to give up all of your ties to other people and stay in this castle to be the sorceress. But I'm not all about that. I've got a lot of people I really deeply care about and love, and I don't want to give them up. And I'm going to see if I can do it my way. And the power let her. So to me, it was just that none of the others had tried. Like, it was in their head like, oh, this is just the way it's got to be. And so that's what they did. Whereas she was like, I'm going to see if I can push the limits a little bit and see what it'll let me do. And it did. So I was okay with that. That didn't really bother me so much. But it was a little fast paced.
If it wasn't as fast paced, right, that would have made the payoff of the scene where Hevelin is like, I can kick your ass because I can leave the castle, right? There was that whole scene and she floats up out into the sky, and then, like, obviously, like, we knew, but I think, like, at that point, think of it this way. What if Tila had done some type of, speech to, like, the pool of the elders, and then rises up as the sorceress, but maybe she doesn't know she can leave the castle. Like, they could have done some type of scene, to make this a more powerful impact when she has to go and leave and fight Evelyn. Like, it just missed opportunities. Like, you can see, I kind of like the idea, right? Maybe I can get on board with headstrong Tila getting her way every turn of life. But maybe if it was just had a bit more time to sizzle with me.
Yeah, I get that. And I totally agree with she gets everything she wants and has to sacrifice nothing. Like, that doesn't feel right.
She still has not, in my opinion, given Adam his day. Adam sacrificed himself to save the entire universe.
Mm-hmm.
Tila didn't do that because she didn't have even the confines of being the sorceress. So I just feel that Prince Adam was treated so poorly in this overall. I feel
well, it's funny because everything you just said, right? Like, this is also kind of goes back to these feeling like Part 1 and Part 2 were produced by completely different teams, because if having watched Part 1, it feels like they set up everything for all the things that we're talking about. For Tila to have to sacrifice something in the end and become the sorceress, for Adam to get his due, whatever. Like, all of what was set up in Part 1 doesn't really get paid off in Part 2 because they don't have time to pay it off. So we're just going to rush through everything and cut corners and shortcuts and things. And I'm someone that actually enjoyed Part 2, but I still see these flaws in the storytelling aspect of it, particularly when you take steps back and you look at Revelation as a whole from 1 to 10. Those episodes, it's not a cohesive story, and Part 1 feels cohesive. Part two feels like now we have to throw everything at the wall. It's very strange.
Yeah, I was gonna say, do you think fan reaction would have been different if all 10 episodes had been released at once? But would that have been even more jarring?
It's hard. It's so hard to tell. But
I've seen way more positive reactions. Like, I was surprised.
Oh, I've seen more positive reactions to the second part.
Yeah, for part two. So I actually think if they would have dropped all 10, and this goes to your point, Josh, that you made earlier, like, it would have been different if I didn't have the CGI show in the middle, right? So if just all 10 dropped, it would be interesting to me to go back in time and see how my brain processed it, watching it as one entity all at once. I like, would it have shocked me as much? Like, or would I have still, because here's another thing to think about. Think of the emotional high, for lack of a better term, of the anticipation of revelation, right? Because even both trailers, the teaser and the regular trailer for part one, were like so good. And I think like it was just so like hyped for revelation that also might have helped skew my view more positive if all 10 had dropped at the same time. I think I would have the similar complaints about characterization or lack of character development in the story, but I might have been more accepting of it because as a fan, I had a little bit of rose-colored glasses on because it was something new.
Mm-hmm.
And there is some good, a lot of good in Revelation. We've been really focusing on like the problems with part two, right? But there are positives. I still like a lot of the acting was good, even if a lot of the lines in part two were not as strong as part one, which is also really jarring. It's another thing that kind of makes it feel like it's written by a different group, because the dialogue in part one, particularly after episode one, right? Like episode one, it was very obviously deliberately written like a Filmation episode with a lot of like those kind of funny little quips and things that the characters did.
Mm-hmm.
Then 2 through 5, it's very much written like a true to life type dialogue for the most part in the 2 through 5 episodes, and it feels very authentic. This is, if these characters were not cartoon characters, if these were real people in a real world, i.e. Eternia, this is probably how they would talk, or close to how they would talk, even, dropping, the occasional mild profanity and things like that, right? Like it felt very, very authentic. And then in part two, it kind of goes back to a much more comic booky, quippy sort of thing for the vast majority of the dialogue. Even with that said, some of the actors, not all, I thought did reasonably well with what they had. I still really like Mark Hamill's Skeletor. I know there was some debate about that in our group chat, but I think he overall did pretty well. And there's a line, I mentioned this before we started podcasting, there's a line that kind of works on both levels, where toward the end, when He-Man transforms gives Skeletor kind of the power temporarily to help save the universe, and Skeletor asks him why he did that, and he says, I wanted you to see what it feels like to use the power to save the universe. And that line, while kind of cheesy and kind of comic booky, and it really, really feels like a Filmation line. Like I can literally hear John Irwin saying those words in my brain. Like it's completely perfect. It also doesn't, it's written in a way that it doesn't feel like it would have been wrong for any part of Revelation. Like it fits with He-Man's characterization. It fits, the way it should have been. It fits with the tone of a lot of Revelation from start to finish. So like that one works, but there were a lot of lines that didn't in part two as well. But the acting I thought was still pretty good. The music was was good. The animation, like you guys, I guess, were saying, is good. I can't tell, but I'm taking your word for it. So and the story, I think the story itself, like if you boil it down to its components, right? Okay, Skeletor's got the power, Tila becomes the sorceress, Skeletor is obsessed with killing He-Man. Evelyn decides that she's going to betray Skeletor, and she gets the power and kind of goes nuts using it to do terrible things. Like all of that stuff, like it's all fine. Like that's all could be a great Masters of the Universe story if it had been executed better. Like I think there is a lot of good here. And if you can and want to take the time to retrofit it and rejigger it and try to rationalize the parts that don't work and pretend the bad things aren't there, like Savage He-Man, then there's a lot of good shining pieces of Revelation on the whole. It was just poorly executed in, I think, the pacing and the cramming too much in. And dude, like really, it's like every toy that Mattel ever made for Masters needed to appear in part 2, whether it really needed to be there or not. Like that aspect of it felt so much like this is just an animated version of the mini comics. That's what it felt like. Here's Point Dread, here's the Talon Fighter, here's the whatever. Like just pick any toy basically that Mattel ever made for Masters, and it was probably in part 2 somewhere.
Well, it's piggyback off that. They did it really well, like one place, right? And then they did it horribly 4 places later, right? So like example, I thought the way they utilized Ram Man, that worked for me.
Yeah.
And I thought that like people like Stratos, Buzz Off should have had some type of brief, even if brief, like the Ram Man scene was brief, but that had satisfactual payoff to me. Whereas just seeing, the Stratos, Buzz Off, Blade, Goatman, Pig Boy, especially Blade, that was pointless. That he just jumps out of nowhere and is there for like 5 seconds. Like it's weird because as a fan, I like it. It services me. But at the same time, I'm like, this is like not good fan service. Like, I'm not going to say, John, why did you love Revelation Part 2? Because Blade appeared 10 seconds. Like, you know what I mean? Whereas I could say like Leanne, coming from Leanne's perspective, if that Ram Man, like if Stratos had a scene like Ram Man did, wouldn't you feel more satisfied with his appearance?
Yes.
Yeah.
And they did this right in some respects in part 1, right? Like, so Preternia was the thing, or the 3 towers, whatever you want to call that, whatever name you want to give that. First animated appearance ever in part 1. And it was used well. It was used to further the story. It was used in a way that actually makes more sense than Preternia did, because like Preternia, like it's the Eternia from ancient history is how it was originally built. So it's pre-Eternia. Doesn't make any sense. The people that live in the past did not call the world pre-Earth. Like it doesn't, it's ridiculous, right? It's a silly name. But they changed it to this to be like the heaven dimension or whatever. Eternia's equivalent of that, and called it, Preternia, which makes sense if you parse the word differently. It's like preternatural, right? Like Preternia. Like, then it's like, oh, not only did you use this in a better way, did you use it in a way that actually furthered the story and mattered to what we were doing, but I think they improved the idea of what the 3 towers in Preternia were supposed to be. So it's like they did this right in places, and especially with that in part 1. It didn't all need to be these little, oh, here's Pig Boy, here's Blade, here's, Stratos and Buzz Off getting 3 seconds on screen just so that we can say they were there.
And we didn't need to see Moss Man die twice. Just come on.
Poor Moss Man.
Or Panther.
Right? Not
my head canon is that Preternia came back into existence when they defeated Evelyn or whatever.
It would have been, it would have been nice if they showed that.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's something that was skipped over. And then what makes it worse is I actually in Revelation I liked King Grayskull in this, and now I guess he's gone because they never did really show Preternia coming back. So it's like, I don't know.
Well,
I love King
they
Grayskull
didn't
in
even.
this.
I was just gonna say that's why I actually thought Preternia did come back because of the scene with Evil Lynn. I thought she was on Preternia. Like, okay, she's dead, so that Orko or Gandalf or Orko is alive.
Orko the White.
But yeah, but then Josh was like, she's on Tralla, and I'm like, huh? And he's like, oh well, the audio description said that, so I'm like, oh, I'm jumping back on Netflix. And I turned on the audio description, which, by the way, there's another compliment for the show. The narrator of that audio description, I love. After I listened to the episode or the portion of the episode that Josh referenced, so there's another compliment to the show, the audio description narrator. But anyway, they said she's on Tralla, so I'm like, so like none of this makes sense. And again, don't give me the answer that this will be explained in season 2, because you didn't even explain to the general audience that she's on Tralla, because
if we can't, if the hardcore fans don't know she's on Tralla, who's gonna know she's on?
Technically,
Like,
if you pay close attention, because I did when I watched it again, they do show the rainbows. They're still not upside down, whatever. But you have to look for it, because they only show them very briefly, and then they pan over, and you're seeing like the arches of something else.
Would you agree that it was more? Would you agree that it was? I need a thesaurus or something. Like, was it? Gosh, how do I phrase this?
Glossed over?
No. Is it unreasonable for the general audience, given part 1, to think that Preternia was reformed and that's where she was? Because like that was my impression, like when I saw it.
I could see that, yeah. I certainly didn't catch it the first time I watched it, that was Tralla. I was just like, oh, she's somewhere else now, okay. And I had to pay attention also during my second watch of the last episode that after she pulls Orko back down and he's with the group, she's still there. Like Evil Lynn is still standing with the rest of them. She doesn't like disappear. So that's when I was like, oh no, she didn't change places. She's just still alive. Okay. And so is he.
And so how does she end up on Tralla? Like, we don't know, because they don't bother to flesh anything out. Like,
you see like a symbol, some kind of magical symbol underneath her feet. It's kind of like a transporter, and then she just appears there and then that symbol goes away, and then and she looks different now. She's like dressing different. She has long hair. She looks younger almost, but that just might just be the way she's styled. Just makes her look younger. But yeah, and she drops her staff and just kind of goes off to have a new life, it seems like. But it would have been nice to have that explored a little more. Or
it plays right into the power of Grayskull is used so loosely in this series. Like you mentioned, she doesn't disappear. She's still Evil Lynn, right? At that point, like when.
Well, she's powered down, isn't she?
She is powered down then. But I think the problem I had was so Adam says, let the power return, which is proper. And then you power down or whatever. Why, when he had the power sword, then wasn't he powering down people? Like when Skelegod started to fight HeMan, right?
Mm-hmm.
HeMan transformed Skeletor back into Skelegod. Just like he transforms Battlecat into Cringer, right?
Yeah.
So why didn't Adam then just say, let the power return, turn Skeletor back into Skeletor, then turn back into He-Man if you can't do it separately, and then kick his butt? Like it made no sense to me, because when he throws Skelegod out into the space, and he ends up crashing near Snake Mountain, he's back to Skeletor, but he was never powered down from Skelegod.
Yeah.
So, here's a couple.
I'm so confused at the power
I'll tell
of
you
Grayskull.
how,
Yeah.
I'll tell you how I read some of that. I don't know if it's right or not, but this was my interpretation of a lot of that stuff. And then I want to also circle back because I wanted to ask you all a question about the troll thing. But before we get to that, my thinking on that was that when He-Man turns others into like Cringer into Battle Cat or whatever, he's only giving them a fragment of the power. So like, because I think we could all agree, right? Battle Cat is not as powerful as He-Man is, right? So Skeletor may look like Skelegod, but he doesn't have the level of power that he did when he was the primary wielder of the power, right? So that was how I was like
Oh, I see what you're saying.
like there's only ever one primary wielder, and then if they give a fragment of it to somebody else and transform them, that's fine, but they are still supreme.
Well, then can you explain this to me? I guess what I don't understand then is did Skeletor or Skelegod not make Evelyn a true, quote unquote, true sorceress of Castle Grayskull? Because she didn't go into that pool to become, her Victoria's Secrets version.
Yeah, because he didn't know any of that, right?
Yeah.
So he was just like, hey, we need a sorceress. How about you?
So he just powered her up. Then I'm trying to go with the sequence of events. So Evelyn is never like sorceress level. Okay, this is where I'm also confused because Evelyn uses the sword and turns into Evelyn. Okay, so she's not the sorceress, but when Teela turns into the sorceress, she now becomes literally the most powerful being in the universe, like more powerful than her champion. So like I am so confused, and I get that's why Teela was able to. Remember when she says to Evelyn, like, none of this is real anyway. I just created this vision for you, with Zor and the snake and all of that. So I guess I'm just like so confused. And what are the rules? And maybe the answer the writer would say is, well, the power of Grayskull is endless power and knowledge. There are no rules. It makes its own rules.
Yeah, I mean, remember, Teela may have at that point been tapping into the power of the castle. Because remember, like, there was the sorceress, pretty much in Filmation and everything thereafter, right? Has always been like a powerful sorceress in her own right, right? And then when she needs extra power, she can draw on the Elder's power or whatever, right? But she doesn't usually have it. So at this moment, Teela is drawing on that power, but it's not something she can do continuously. Or
yeah, okay, that makes
whatever.
more sense to me. Yeah.
Like that's at least that again. That's how I interpreted it. But none of this is actually made clear because
That's
they don't
what I was
have
gonna
time
say.
to make it clear.
Yeah,
So-
that's what, like the fact that you had to walk me through that, right? And your walkthrough, perfect. Like I accept that, right? Right there, you sold me on that sequence of events. But what you used to sell me on is purely your speculation. I think it's valid and good speculation, but that's the sole part that's missing from this section.
Yes.
Of the
because they cram too much of stuff that is meaningless and don't take the time on the important details of telling you a story. Like,
well, and don't you think there's ways to do things like fan servicing and the fact that we want to sell maybe a Savage He-Man toy, or I'm not hating on the mini comic people. Maybe they're like, look, the mini comic people get kind of crapped on all the time because they're like, that's not He-Man, Filmation is He-Man, so we want to give the mini comic people a little love. I just think they would have had to approach it in a different way.
Put Savage He-Man in Preternia and give him a cameo when Adam was there. Like, he was a He-Man from the past. Done.
Right, and you could have even explained that, like, that's why they decided they needed a conduit, right? That's why they decided they needed the Sword of Power and Sword of Protection. Oh, now see that I'm all on board on. Look how excited I am. I'm like, this is what happens when you channel the power without that.
See?
Oh,
so,
such a missed opportunity.
It would have been great. Still would have had your toy. Everything would have been great.
Oh my gosh, I am so bummed now. I'm like more bummed than I was previously, because I think that's like a solid, legit way of handling it. They could have even had, oh my God, they could have had a whole scene where, like, you know how in the mini comics he's like, the green goddess or whatever gives him the shield and the harness and all. Like, they could have had something like a backstory that they explained to Adam, which again would have given Adam more screen time in part 1, right? Because that was another complaint of, well, they threw him to Preternia and we never learned why he stayed Adam instead of He-Man and stuff like that. Oh, missed opportunities. Oh,
yes, there's a lot of those in this because they just were trying to cram too much into too little time. I want to circle back to Trollo for a second because I have a question for y'all. Okay, so did I just say y'all? What happened to me?
Yay! I'm being a good influence.
I'm blame Katie. Okay, now we're now we're moving on. Okay, so Trolla. So 2 things. One, do we think that if they had dropped all 10 episodes at once, it might have made it easier to recognize Trolla because it wouldn't have been both 6, 7 episodes and 4 months, 5 months ago, whatever it is? Would that have made it easier to if you'd watched them all together, like, oh yeah, that's Trolla again, we just saw that in a few hours ago in episode 3 or 4, I think it was. And second of all, doesn't that then also kind of bring us back to the why aren't things upside down in this Trolla? Why aren't the rainbows upside down and so on and so forth? Because that would have made Trolla way more recognizable for that final scene. Right? Like, you would have seen the upside down rainbow and immediately been like, oh, Trolla. Like, so
I really think it's because they completely changed Orko's backstory. That's the only thing that makes sense to me, because in this version, he was never a great wizard on Trolla. He was always laughed at and terrible and made fun of, etc. So it wasn't due to the fact that he was on another planet and things were backwards on his planet than Eternia. So I guess that's why they just were like, okay, we're getting rid of all the backwards stuff because he was just a terrible wizard and his parents hated him.
It's strange though too, because it's not even just like that was canonized in Filmation, right? Like, in the Mike Young show, when they show the flashback of Orko arriving on Eternia, the first words out of his mouth are, why is everything upside down here? Like, this is literally been Orko's, the Trollan canon forever, always. Like, it's never really deviated from that, except maybe in the DC comics. I don't know, because we didn't finish those. But
well, think about it. That's why this goes back to, and I know a fan worked, a dedicated fan also was involved in this show. But like, when you have someone, like Kevin Smith didn't like Orko, right? But the way to fix, for lack of a better term, a character is not to completely change the character like that, because then he is no longer Orko. If you don't like Orko, how can you enhance that character but still keep him the same, the core?
Yes, but then you end up with Orc Zero, which is a travesty as far as I'm concerned.
But listen, like, the only thing that felt authentic about that Orko, the new Orko, was the voice actor. I thought, he was fantastic. Kudos. And I was able to meet him at PowerCon. He is genuinely a super nice person. He took time to speak with me. I think his voice is fantastic. This is nothing against like the performance of Orko. Right. It's just like you said, they had to, for Kevin, I'm just using Kevin Smith as a generalization, like, to improve this character, Kevin Smith had to go and completely change him. I don't feel that you have the right to do that in a sequel to the original property, just because you didn't like Orko, right? You could enhance Orko and make him better, but you have to keep him at his core. And that is exactly still the same problem I have with what they did to Prince Adam. Like, you're correct. They kept proper characterization of Teela. She's hot-headed, strong-willed, opinionated, right? Like, that fits with Teela. But the other decisions they made with some of this stuff, it's like, I don't care if you, Kevin Smith, don't like Orko. Many of us like him, and I always loved the fact, one of my favorite episodes of the Filmation show is when Prince Adam's on Tralla and he can't figure out how to transform, and then he figures it out and he says, Grayskull of power thee by. And I used to recite that as a kid. Like,
yes.
it's little things like that you get the point.
Counterpoint.
Yeah,
counterpoint.
Go do it.
So I don't fundamentally disagree with anything that you just said. However, I think that maybe maybe there's a I think maybe the circumstances that led us to this point are different than what you're imagining, because what it feels more like to me is not that they were trying to change Orko's backstory to make it Kevin Smith or whoever like Orko better. That to me, that's not what it feels like. What it feels like was Orko was being looked at from the people working on this show as such a, it's the argument that some certain pieces of the fan base will say, well, Orko is just Snarf and Slimer, and every 80s kids cartoon had to have the cutesy little kid type character, which I don't think Orko actually fits very well into that mold, but I understand that was a role. He was the comic relief role in the original cartoon, right? But he did have this whole big backstory and everything else. It feels like to me that when they approached this show, it wasn't, let's change Orko's backstory. It's, we don't like Orko. We're not even going to bother to see if he ever had a backstory. We're going to give him one to flesh out this subplot that we're doing with Orko in these 3 or 4 episodes that he appears in. And they didn't, they either didn't check or used it, did what they wanted to do, and then found out later and couldn't be bothered to make it match with the old canon. Like, that's what it feels more like to me. Not that it was a conscious choice to change it, just that they cared so little about Orko that they were like, we're not going to get it right, and everyone must feel the way we do, right? So
can I take that one step further and ask you a question? Because you didn't, I know from our previous chat, you didn't have as much of a problem with this as I did. So let's just say, for argument's sake, like, they didn't like Orko. They didn't even care to really research his backstory, okay? Or they didn't feel it was that important to leave, Tralla upside down, that kind of stuff. Then why did they just basically rip off Gandalf from Lord of the Rings? Which, preface, I didn't know the line that in part 1, when Orko says whatever it is, like, back to the shadows and stuff, like, I didn't know those were Gandalf lines because I had never seen Lord of the Rings, the first movie. And I know it's a book. I get it. It's a book, but it's
no,
long.
Just watch the movies. The books are terrible,
so,
in my opinion.
recently, I watched the 3 Hobbit movies and the 3 Lord of the Rings movies, including the 4-hour cut of Return of the King. Okay, wow. So I watched everything. And I was just completely disgusted at the I don't call what they did with Orko an homage to Gandalf or Lord of the Rings. I call it lazy ripoff writing, because he says exact quotes from Gandalf, and he does the exact same thing. Scareglow is basically what, the Balrog or whatever that thing is. Orko the Red dies, for lack of a better term, and comes back, just like Gandalf comes back as Gandalf the White. He comes back at an opportune moment as, Orko, and he has white robes on, and apparently now he's the Oracle or whatever. And I never liked that portion of the Mike Young show. But if you have a problem with Orko and you're going to go to the great lengths of actually changing his established and well-established, like you said, Josh, unlike a Snarf or Slimer character, right? A well-established funny character, comic relief character, why are then we just ripping off Lord of the Rings and instead not just giving him something unique?
So here's my two parts to this. So one, if I had been the one writing the Revelation story, I absolutely would not have done this. So I understand where you're coming from. Like, I'm not like, yeah, they did Gandalf with Orko. I am not in that camp. It doesn't really bother me because as I mentioned to you in the chat, if this had been literally doing this with any other character from anything else than Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is the foundation of all modern fantasy. It's like literally what established modern fantasy. So they're going back to the beginning of this concept.
I got that
And-
when you said that, but
Okay, so
wait, real quick though. Let me just
okay.
give you a different example that I didn't have a problem with. When I watched the Hobbit through the Lord of the Rings, I also said, "Oh my gosh, did Harry Potter get a lot of ideas from Lord of the Rings?"
Oh, totally.
But I didn't feel the way she did it in Harry Potter was a direct ripoff. Like, it felt like an homage or like a inspiration from the same type of idea. Whereas this was just like, oh, let's do like the Gandalf story arc for Orko. And it might even be, Josh, that he uses the same phrases.
Yeah,
You know,
I
like if
understand.
Harry Potter, like instead of he was like expecto patronum, right? He's like, back to the shadows with you, Voldemort, or something. I don't know. Then I would be like, oh my god, come on, that's Gandalf's line.
Okay, so then
Yeah.
let me pose a question
Yes.
because I think it falls in the same category. And again, want to just emphasize, if I had been writing or consulted, I would have not gone the Gandalf route with work.
Right.
I mean, or at
You're
least
just
not,
giving me
not
the
to
counter.
degree that they
You're
did.
trying to illustrate to me why or
It doesn't bother me.
Why it
basically.
doesn't bother you, and why other probably authors or creative individuals may do similar things.
Right. And so here is another very similar thing from Masters, specifically from the beginning, right?
Oh no, don't destroy my childhood, John.
I know. But here's another thing. Adam becomes He-Man using the Sword of Power. The Sword of Power phrase was in many earlier versions of the King Arthur legend was what they called the Excalibur. It also was sometimes called the Sword of War, and whatever. And it was another magical sword that was wielded to give the wielder power in battle and so on and so forth. So they absolutely drew that from the King Arthur legends when they were first putting together Masters. So I mean, you could make the same argument that too is kind of a ripoff, right? But they're going back to a foundational thing, right? If somebody pulled out a wand in Masters and said, this wand has a phoenix feather in it, I'd be like, okay, that was a bridge too far, because Harry Potter, as much as I love the property, is not a fantasy, foundational fantasy property, at least not at this point. It's too young, right? It's too new. Like maybe in 100 or 200 years, they could say, okay, all the fantasies come after that. Harry Potter was a foundational thing. And now you can pull off a reference like that, right? We're 80 years on from Lord of the Rings. We're 1,500 years on since the earliest legends of King Arthur. So we can pull from these very, very early things and do more direct references and things to them. And to me, that's okay, because these are things that are well-established foundations. So I'm just saying,
what you said, though,
for me, it's
no, and I see your point. For me, though, what you described with King Arthur and He-Man is what I described of Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter. For me, the difference would be is, let's say, if Prince Adam had to go into Castle Grayskull and there's a sword, a power sword in the stone or something similar, and like, you know, he reads the stone and it says, you know, who pulleth out this sword in this whatever. You remember what was there's something, you know, is the right wielder of the power. Like
that's ripping off Disney, not the King Arthur legends, because in the original King Arthur legends, Arthur doesn't get the sword from stone. So,
but you know what I have to use my knowledge of it. But it's my knowledge of Sword in the Stone. I'm talking about like the book, The Sword in the Stone. Okay. So like to me, I would say He-Man is a direct ripoff of the book, The Sword in the Stone. Okay.
Right. Okay.
If it used like almost that exact similar kind of like setup and verbiage, but the fact that they both have a power sword is just more like in like Harry Potter, how those I don't remember because I don't commit things to memory, but like Death Eaters or something are kind of like in Lord of the Rings, the like those minions of Sauron, or whatever. Yeah, you know what I mean. People with dark cloaks and blah blah blah. Like they look similar, they got a similar shtick, but they're kind of just like an homage back to.
Oh, I think you're thinking of the Dementors.
Dementors,
like
yes, Dementors, yeah.
Dementors,
so like that to me is okay. Whereas the Gandalf thing with Orko just went too far. And I guess my problem with it was more so they wanted to make Orko a better character, but instead they just ripped off Gandalf. And it might just be because I had that knowledge of what Kevin Smith had said in interviews about Orko.
Right.
That I am more harshly judging this. Like if Tila, okay, as the sorceress had defeated evil Lyn and said something like back to the shadows or whatever Gandalf's line is, I might have been okay with that because that was just like, oh, that's an homage to Lord of the Rings, like the whole Gandalf thing. But Tila herself, I wouldn't have seen as like a Gandalf carbon copy.
Yeah. So here's a question then for you, because I think this whole back and forth with you and I on this Gandalf thing, I think this maybe we could sum it up as doing this kind of thing. There's a fine line where you can take it. You've crossed that line. You've done too much, and I think very different people are going to have different views on where exactly that line falls. For me, what they did here is just barely not crossing that line, and for you, it's definitely crossing that line.
I see what you're saying. Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like, because I don't really dispute anything that you're saying per se. I just, to me, given all of the bits and pieces, like to me, this falls just short of going too far. Like I said, I would not have done this at all, but for you, it definitely was on the other side of that line, which I think those can both be valid perspectives. It's just we personally have different places where that line is and where it's crossed.
And okay, so here's a question. Do we think a line was crossed when Queen Marlena was quoting lines from Clueless?
Yes.
Thank
you.
Yes. and Leanne and others, this is coming from, I would probably put Clueless in my top 10 movies of all time. I vividly even remember going premiere weekend to see that movie. And like, I love Clueless. Like that is like pure, like that is the 90s, right? Or like,
next time you see my sister, you need to talk to her because it's also one of her all-time favorites.
See, I knew I liked your sister for a reason. But it was just, I get why they did it. I'm a little bit more forgiving of something like that, but I thought it was out of place. Like even doesn't she say something in one of the episodes, and I apologize again because I did not watch it again, but she says something like, you know, I don't know, like Talon Fighter, my butt.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Long story, my butt.
Yeah.
Hated it, cringed so hard.
Yeah.
And then when she said as if.
And then also there was that random line during the battle at the end where Randor says something about he's talking to the demons he's fighting, and he says something about kissing the ring.
Yes.
He says it in like a Spanish accent. I do not understand that at all.
It's probably another reference to something that we're just not getting.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. Yeah.
But it's just so jarring, you know?
Maybe something
Yeah.
that actor was in, like Clueless was for Alicia Silverstone. Maybe he was in some other thing where he does that. And so if you know, you know, kind of thing. But yeah, I don't understand. So here's the other thing with the other problem with the Alicia Silverstone quoting Clueless thing is Queen Marlena, again, no matter what canon, what version of the mythos you're looking at, she has always been portrayed, I guess this gets back to your characterization thing, John. She has always been portrayed as sort of like the ultimate consummate like mother figure, right? Like
Yes.
she's very, very very, very much portrayed that way. And having her quote lines as a teenager from circa 1994 or whatever feels so weird for the character. It's like it doesn't even ring true. You're just like, what am I listening to here? This is very odd.
Marlena has what, Martin? 4, maybe 3 lines in the New Adventures of HeMan. No. In New Adventures, I'm saying in New Adventures.
Yeah,
and,
more or less.
And her characterization in that scene is miles ahead of her in Revelation Part 2.
I mean, you don't remember the scene in the New Adventures of HeMan episode A New Beginning in which Adam tells his parents he's leaving for Primus, and King Randor stands up and goes, "Primus, my ass!"
Yeah.
You should be executed.
Yeah. I will still say that I haven't seen that scene topped. The New Adventures revealing to his parents that he's He-Man. I mean, I'm sorry, but Revelation didn't do it right.
Can I don't know if I said this on the last episode or not. If I did, forgive me, but I want to say it here that I am just so over undoing Adam's secret. Like, everything since Filmation has been trying to undo that piece of the mythos. New Adventures had the reveal. I guess maybe with the exception of Mike Young, because I don't think they ever did that. But New Adventures had that reveal. The big DC comics of the last decade did that from the get-go. Same thing with the S-Pup, She-Ra, and Adora, and undoing her having any sort of secret identity. This one comes around, they do the same thing. The CG show that just came out, same thing. I don't understand. Like, I get it if you want some versions to do that, but it's getting old now. Like, I would not at all mind if they want to go back and tell us a master story where Adam has to keep the secret. It makes sense because he's trying to keep people around him safe, yada, yada, yada. Let it alone for once. Like, we don't need to undo it 10 different ways over 30 years. Like, I'm over the undoing of the secret thing, like way over it.
Yeah, I get that complaint. I understand it.
I prefer the secret identity just because I want the transformation sequence. But I think what's important about it is, Adam is his true self, not He-Man. It's not like, how like they say Bruce Wayne is like a facade and like Bruce Wayne is really Batman. Like, that's how he kind of like his mind, his mood, his thought process. Like, the true self is Batman and Bruce Wayne is like the show he puts on. But I think it's
the respectable face.
Right, exactly. But like, the episode of She-Ra, original She-Ra, Stone in the Sword, when Adora has to go through all those tasks because the sword, is broken. Oh, and look at that again. Couldn't transform with a broken sword. I hate when they change things in sequels. But okay, so she can't transform, but they did that whole episode. The whole point of that episode was to tell, children, if you will, right, all of the qualities of She-Ra are within Adora. You know, the sword maybe brings them out and allows her to express them or whatever. It enhances them, yeah. But you know, her true self is Adora, and I don't know. I really, I don't know where I was going with that. I forget what we were talking about before.
One thing that I really enjoyed about this show, like off the back of that point that you've just made, when they had the big Skeletor and Adam versus Evelyn battle at the end, was that Adam is still a good fighter. Like, he's still got the skills. He just doesn't have the strength and the power. So he was still like a threat to Evelyn, but he was having to like jump around a bit more, and Skeletor was sending him through portals and stuff to sort of compensate for the fact that he wasn't as strong. I thought they did that really well.
I did like that. And I liked that team up. And I did like how Skeletor immediately turns on HeMan when it's the proper time. I did like that too. That was very in character.
Yes.
My favorite like moment, I think, of the entire series of part 2 was when Skeletor and Adam turn up at Grayskull, and he's got Panther with him, and he's like, "Look, Evelyn, it's Panther," and she's like, "I'm more of a dog person." And then Skeletor turns to Adam and he's like, "Told you." So they like, at some point they had a conversation where Adam was like, "You should bring Panther," and Skeletor was like, "Well, that's not going to work, you idiot."
See, there are bright moments even in the darkest days.
I love that. I mean, I hated that Panther died, but when he was killed, Skeletor was like, "I'll kill you for that." And I was just like, yes.
Yeah, like, I think we could all feel his pain then.
Yes.
It was a very affecting death, I think, in a show that like killed off the sorceress, one of the principal characters. I like didn't really care. I was like, oh yeah, I guess we've got to do that. Like, I don't really care about Fisto either. Clamp Champ, I was like, oh, it's a shame because he didn't do anything. But when they killed Panther, I was like, no. Like, I was genuinely aggrieved to have lost Panther.
Yes.
I hope that if there is a season 2 of Revelation, I hope that they learn lessons from producing season 1 and maybe the fact that they did cram such a just absurd amount of stuff into particularly the second half. Maybe that means that they'll be a little bit more free to work on the story aspect of season 2 and not make it so much we've got to get in all the stuff that we never saw in the Filmation show and we have to cram it all into these 5 episodes or whatever. I'm hoping that maybe they will have learned something in the creation of season 1, and if there's a season 2, be able to give us a more satisfying story and I know, John, you keep saying, I don't want to hear, well, wait for season 2 and this will be explained, that will be explained. I agree with you. All that stuff should have been dealt with much better in season 1, but they weren't. So maybe they will now deal with them in season 2 and make us feel a little better in the end.
Well, one last topic then that we should touch on is the actual end of part 2, which does set up a potential season 2. This was a part that I actually liked, and it's not just because I love the Horde, but it is because I love the Horde. But they actually got me, like, haha, I didn't even think to connect the motherboard thing, which was a technology, right, staring me right in the face, that would be a Horde thing. Like, I don't know if I just wasn't, it just, because it was just weird in part 1. And then it wasn't mentioned in part 2 at all until this end scene. So I totally forgot about the motherboard stuff. But the fact that the motherboard, whatever that is a Horde technology, that was exciting. And I thought that was actual creative writing, that Hordak would have had something sent or hiding on Eternia for like the proper moment. Like maybe it sensed that the magic was leaving the planet or something, and he knew he could get back at Skeletor now or something. I don't know. But My caveat, as always, though, is, and I think many of you share this, is that Masters of the Universe to me is not two separate properties, Masters of the Universe and Princess of Power. And I particularly already had a cartoon series, Mike Young, that had the Horde without She-Ra. And I got a cartoon series that had the Horde without He-Man, which was Netflix She-Ra. So we've already covered those bases. And if this is truly a sequel to, the classic line, that includes She-Ra. And I personally, just saying it, I don't want a season 2 if it's not going to include the She-Ra aspects that would go along with the Horde. But I am excited for the Horde, as long as they are written well and character developed.
All right, two things. One, as far as the the motherboard thing and not connecting that to the Horde, I know I actually thought a ton about this after we finished Revelation, and I didn't connect any of that together either. And I think for me, and maybe you can say if you think this might be for you as well. I think the reason that was such a great reveal and didn't put the pieces I didn't put the pieces together initially is a result of the fact that we are such dedicated longtime fans, and the Mike Young show so firmly established Triclops as the inventor, tech wizard villain that we just were like, oh, that perfectly fits in with how Triclops was portrayed in Mike Young. And so the Horde never even, your brain never goes any further than that, because at least that's what happened for me, right? Like my brain never went any further than, oh, well, that just fits in with how Triclops, because Triclops didn't have much of a characterization at all in the Filmation season. He was just sort of a character that popped up every once in a while, had one line, and then was defeated, and you didn't see him again for another 20 episodes. So he was very underused in the Filmation series. And so I don't know if that was for everybody. For me, I think that was why that never even entered in. And if that was deliberately done that way, kudos to them, because it totally worked.
Yeah, I'll accept that. That's totally valid.
Mm-hmm.
And then as far as the She-Ra thing, 100% agree. Like, don't do the Horde without She-Ra if you're going to do season 2. But I do want to pick a bone with you for a minute because I don't agree that we got a Horde show without He-Man. S-Pop does not really have the Horde. It has Hordak and it has Shadow Weaver, and that is it. We do not see not really. I mean, I know Grizzler's in the background or something, but for the most part, we don't really get the Horde in S-Pop. It's one of my biggest complaints about the show, actually, is that I wanted the rest of the Horde there. So we haven't really truly seen the Horde since the 80s She-Ra cartoon.
Yeah, that's true. Because even Mike Young didn't have a lot.
It had almost nothing more. And then most of it was just like appear on screen for 10 seconds, right? Like, I mean, we see like Mantenna and stuff, but like it's very, very, very short lived. And I don't think hardly any of them had any dialogue, right? Like,
right. No, you're right. Yeah. It was. And then remember, they shifted the focus to the Snake Men. So, which was fine because we never saw them animated. Well, King Hiss and stuff. So,
yeah. And that was fine. But I'm just saying, like, we haven't gotten the Horde in a long time. I do want them to bring the Horde into season 2. That would be fantastic, but not without She-Ra. So,
I for one hope that they use Skeletor being infected with the motherboard virus to give him some sort of New Adventures-esque look in the next season.
It would fit perfectly.
Perfect opportunity to do it, yeah. They won't do, though, because they don't like me.
Okay, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, refresh my memory. Wasn't that part of the Classics BIOS? Wasn't that how New Adventures?
Yes.
Yeah, it was, right? Like, so, and they've definitely drawing a lot from Classics these days in all of the things that they're doing, whether it's the CG show or this one. So that wouldn't surprise me at all if they go that route.
You never
I'm
know.
not thrilled, but I don't like the cyborg type thing for Skeletor. It's much better for Hordak, and I think it diminishes Hordak if they give Skeletor the cyborg thing, because it's like it makes them too similar, right? Like Skeletor is the consummate evil wizard, and Hordak is the cyborg tech guy. And if you're going to infect Skeletor, make him a cyborg, it's like, well, now he's just sort of a Hordak knockoff, and I don't really like that. I like the more differentiation between them, but I think that is where they're going. So I think you're going to get your wish.
Maybe He-Man will heal him somehow, or the sorceress.
She-Ra will. She-Ra's the one with the healing powers, right? Maybe She-Ra
that's true.
Skeletor back.
Right, and remember
he's
how
holding
shocked...
relay. While he's holding relay in the snow, She-Ra will come up and say, "Here, back to the way you were, because we don't like you as a cyborg."
They did that very thing in the DC comics. That was when Skeletor got his jaw like broken off in the first story arc. Later on, he finds She-Ra, and he's like, "Hey, would you be able to heal me?" And she does. They have like a complicated backstory in the DC comics where he was like her father figure in some flashbacks.
Interesting.
And she was very young.
It's so sweet.
It is.
I'll have to read them. I have them. I just haven't read them.
I don't read comics, so don't make another season of something where I'm not going to understand it unless I've read the comic, okay?
Yeah,
Thank you.
I know the audience, like, where I can see comic books fitting in with the audience, of He-Man and She-Ra, but I would have preferred, like, a novel to read. It would be easier.
If anybody would like to hire me, I am available to write a Masters of the Universe novel on any version of the property. I am happy to do that. So,
and it would be epic.
Yes.
Lioncourt.com is my contact info is there. Get in touch.
So you'll even do the novelization of the CGI show?
If they offered it to me, I couldn't turn it down.
Yay!
And
but they're like, but the only thing is you have to write it specifically about Duncan.
Oh my God, that would be tough. But I feel like I might be able to work within the confines of what they want and enhance what's there and the things that I did like about it and play down the parts that I didn't. So like I feel like I could do that, but I feel like I could do that with Revelation or anything, right? I'm a Masters fan, right? Like there are gems in every version, even the ones that I don't like, right? Like there are things in New Adventures that I like. I like Optic, for example. Like I like that weird Optic, as a figure and a character. It's like that kind of was cool, right? Like so, you can find the goat in all the different versions of it and play up. For me, if I was going to do something like that, like play up the positive aspects, play down the less so, and I'd make it
Well,
work.
I think that's why it's important for anyone, and even people that are listening, if you didn't agree with our opinion, that's totally cool. Like I said, I've seen a lot of love for part 2 online, like on Facebook and things like that from fans, which is awesome. Like I don't ever want to get into that dark place where it's like, this isn't my He-Man, so I'm going to go on a hate rampage, and anyone that likes it is stupid. No, like if you liked it and that was your thing, that's totally cool. I'm glad you dug it. Like I said, I'm happy for the creative team that we even are getting, He-Man things, CGI show, this comics, that we they are at least trying to keep the He-Man and Masters Universe name out there, whether I like it or not. And you don't have to enjoy anything. I think I've talked about on the podcast before my love-hate relationship with like the continuous development of Batman movies, where I'm like, could someone please make a Batman movie that I enjoy?
Fans tend to forget that with each new thing that comes out, right? Like this is not the last Masters thing that will ever exist, right? Like just like New Adventures wasn't the last Masters thing that ever existed, and Mike Young wasn't the last one that ever existed. Like you're not going to like everything, because that's just it. They've all got, or the last Star Wars movie. There is no such thing anymore. They're going to make Star Wars movies for the next 200 years. Like that's just the way that it is now because Disney owns them and Disney has all the money. So they'll continue making them, and they're going to be popular. And some of them you will like, and some of them you won't. I really love The Force Awakens, for example, and really don't like the prequels. Right? Like it's fine. Like you'll like some, don't like the others. Ignore the things you don't like, and that's fine. This is not, if you didn't like Revelation, this is not the final thing. And if you did, great, you've got another part of the canon to add to the pile of the stuff you do, and you don't have to love or hate anything.
Exactly.
Well said.
Well said. I agree.
Yes.
And it's only one part of Revelation. We potentially have a whole other season 2 coming, which could be like
and it's only half of one part, right? Because I think we all liked part 1 better than part 2. Part 1 was pretty well done overall, even if it wasn't what we expected it to be when we watched it, right? Like it was still pretty competent story, fit in better with our foreknowledge going in, and that sort of it actually, I think, stands up better as a part of the Masters of the Universe than part 2 is. So like it may be that like, okay, second half of season 1 was not great, but maybe they'll redeem themselves in season 2. So
right. Well, I think we have discussed that long enough. And now I can just put it back in the drawer and we can revisit it at another time.
Or never. I'm kidding.
No. And hey, what's great about being a Masters Universe fan, I'm still going to check out season 2. Part 2 does not like again, I hate people that I dislike people who kind of make this, like they draw that line in the sand where it's like, well, part 2 was horrible, or part 1 was horrible, so I'm not going to watch part 2, or part 2 was horrible, so if they do, I don't want them to do another season, right? It just might be that, hey, maybe part 2 is like really popular, they got the views on Netflix, they're going to do a season 2. I mean, I don't blame them. They shouldn't do season 2 because John was upset. No. I mean, like,
Or same thing with me in the CG show. It's like, I'll watch season 2. I'm not particularly looking forward to it. I don't think I'm ever going to revisit the first season. But I'll still watch season 2. Like, it's fine.
Right. So that's why I think it's always important. Give the thing a chance yourself and make your own decision. Like, just because I liked it or didn't like it, that should really have no bearing on your enjoyment or disenjoyment of Masters of the Universe Revelation. And that goes the same for part 1. Like with all that, viciousness that happened during part 1, I still wonder if today, if I let that kind of hinder my enjoyment of part 1 a little bit, and that maybe I would have actually enjoyed part 1 more had I not had all that weird outside influence. I have no idea.
So I'm 100% there with you, because I just unfollowed a bunch of people on Twitter because they were shredding part 1, and I really enjoyed it, and they were, making it hard for me to enjoy the part 1 that I did enjoy very much, because it was just the constant bashing of it. So don't ruin, regardless of your feelings on any of these things, whether it's the CG show or Revelation or the DC comics or whatever. You can state your piece whether you liked it or didn't, but you don't continually bash it and ruin it for the people that do enjoy it, because all that does is a disservice to the property as a whole and the people that love that property.
No, I agree. It is. It's that social media, atmosphere that we have today. Like, we talked amongst ourselves, but I wasn't going on Twitter and like tweeting at people and being like, "How dare you say you liked Savage HeMan?" Like,
right.
You're not a fan. No, you're a fan. You liked it. Maybe you're okay with that characterization of Adam. I just happen to not be. That's totally cool. Like you said, if I was the showrunner, that would have never happened, but I wasn't the showrunner, right? Kevin Smith was, and he liked that idea. So for whatever reason, they ran with it, and people did like it. I mean, people want that Savage He-Man figure. So what can you do? You can just wait and see if there's a part 2, and maybe you'll like it more. All right.
You went full Yogi Bear there for a minute. That was really strange.
Oh, and I don't like any of those Hanna-Barbera cartoons.
I don't either.
No, thank you.
Yeah, not a fan.
Well, with that, thank you for downloading as always. I'm John Callis, also known as Shadow.
I'm Katie Carty Hiley, also known as Rainbow Bright.
I'm John Callis, also known as the Shadow.
I am Leanne Hanna, also known as Stratosmacker.
I'm just a Lioncourt, also known as Lioncourt and not the Shadow.
The Shadow knows.
Good
journey. I'm actually surprised they did not use the phrase "good journey" in Revelation.
All the other references they were making.
Yeah, that would have been an easy reference to make.
Oh, that would have been cool.
But they put Pig Boy in there. So,
Yeah, there we go.